The billionaire woman returned home pretending to be poor. What her family did left her frozen. The storm had passed hours ago, but the dampness lingered in the air as Evelyn Brooks stood at the edge of the estate's long, winding driveway. Hidden beneath a plain gray coat, a faded scarf, and a modest suitcase in hand, she looked nothing like the woman who once ruled this place with grace and iron will. 15 years had changed everything. Her posture, her voice, even her eyes. That was the plan. Now she was Ava, the new live-in housekeeper, recently hired through a third-party agency that Richard Allen used for all the help. He had no idea. The mansion loomed ahead, 3 stories of pristine glass, polished marble, and sharp edges. Once warm and inviting, it had become a cold monument to vanity and control. She'd designed it herself decades ago, every corner filled with intention and care. But now it felt alien, impersonal. The front door opened before she could knock. A man in a navy vest and earpiece gestured impatiently. "Ava, right? You're late. Come on. Staff entrance is around back." She didn't answer, just nodded, clutching her suitcase tighter. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury. The tone in his voice alone told her how things had changed. She followed him through the back halls, once lively with conversation, now silent but for hurried footsteps and short commands. The other staff members barely made eye contact as she was introduced. Ava, the new help. No one recognized her. No one would. Her first day passed in quiet observation. She swept hallways she once walked in heels. She dusted frames of family portraits, most of which had been removed, except for a massive painting of Richard in the main stairwell. His image loomed like a tyrant's watchful gaze, his smile polished but soulless. In the kitchen, 2 maids whispered over coffee in hushed Spanish. Evelyn caught pieces of it. Cut our hours again. Fired Marisol for asking questions. Claire hasn't spoken in days. Claire. The name hit her like a drop of ice down her spine. She hadn't seen her granddaughter since the funeral, if one could call it that. A closed casket ceremony Richard arranged hastily. No time for goodbyes, no time for questions. Just silence, signatures, and the erasure of Evelyn Brooks from every legal document in existence. And now Claire was here, living in this mausoleum? Evelyn kept her face blank and moved on. That night, as the house settled into silence, Evelyn stood by the laundry room window, looking out into the garden she once tended herself. The hydrangeas were gone. So were the fruit trees. All that remained was over-trimmed shrubbery and a cold marble fountain in the center, barely running. That's when she saw her. Claire sat on the edge of the fountain, barefoot, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her long dark hair fell over her face, hiding her expression, but Evelyn didn't need to see it. She knew that posture. She'd worn it herself once, decades ago, long before money, long before power. She wanted to run out and wrap her arms around her, tell her everything, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she watched from behind the glass until Claire rose and disappeared into the shadows. Days passed. Evelyn listened. She cleaned. She watched. She learned. Richard rarely spent more than a few hours at the estate, always arriving late in sleek cars with tinted windows, accompanied by lawyers, assistants, and women too young to care about anything but the drinks and diamonds. He never looked at the staff, never spoke unless it was to demand or degrade. Behind closed doors, his voice grew venomous. Evelyn heard it through vents and behind corners, screaming at business partners, berating employees over phone calls, demanding wires and cleansed files. There was always talk of offshore accounts, moving funds, and silencing leaks. He thought no one paid attention, but Evelyn did. One night, while scrubbing the floors outside the East Wing, she saw a tall man in a suit enter Richard's private office. The door had 3 locks and a keypad. No one but Richard went in or out. She pretended not to notice, kept her eyes down, but as the door opened, she saw inside just long enough to catch a glimpse. Stacks of files, flash drives in organized trays, a wall of monitors, and on the center desk, a small black box with a blinking red light. Evelyn felt her stomach turn. That wasn't a home office. That was a vault of secrets. Later, back in the tiny maid's quarters, she sat on the edge of her cot, holding a photo she had kept hidden in the lining of her suitcase. It was old, worn. A picture of her years ago holding a baby in her arms, Claire. Evelyn had been glowing, her eyes full of pride. What had she allowed to happen? She'd built this empire from nothing, thread by thread, machine by machine. And when cancer came, she'd made the mistake of trusting Richard with power just for a short time, she thought, just until she recovered. But she never got that chance. He declared her dead, legally, sold her properties, shifted her holdings into his name. He hadn't stolen from her. He'd buried her. The following evening, Evelyn passed Claire in the hallway. The girl's eyes were glassy. She didn't speak. She clutched a sketchbook to her chest like a life preserver. Evelyn said nothing, but offered a kind smile. Claire paused. "You're new," she said softly, her voice hoarse. "What's your name?" "Eva," Evelyn replied. Claire blinked. "You remind me of someone." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Maybe someone good, I hope." Claire didn't respond, just gave a small nod, and kept walking. It was the first time Evelyn had heard her speak. The mansion was colder than ever that night, but something had shifted. There was a crack in the surface, a weakness in the mask that Richard wore. Evelyn could feel it. She didn't know exactly what he was hiding behind that locked door, not yet. But she was going to find out. She hadn't returned for revenge. She had come for justice, and she wasn't leaving without her granddaughter. The walls of the Brooks estate no longer echoed with laughter or life. They pulsed with secrets. Evelyn moved through the house like a shadow, her presence unnoticed, her ears always open. Every hallway, every corner, whispered fragments of the truth she had come to uncover. At dawn, while the rest of the house slept, she scrubbed the baseboards of the second floor, listening to the click of high heels in the corridor above, another of Richard's guests leaving discreetly. By mid-morning, she was in the laundry room folding silk linens, hearing the kitchen staff mutter about their missing pay. By nightfall, she stood beside the trash bins as a man in a suit discarded shredded documents, some of which Evelyn would later piece together in her room like a jigsaw puzzle. She wasn't just cleaning a house. She was cleaning up a lie. Her breakthrough came one afternoon while folding napkins beside a maid with silver-threaded hair and tired eyes. Her name was Maria, and Evelyn recognized her instantly, though she pretended not to. Maria had worked at the estate for nearly 30 years, a quiet force of order and dignity. When Evelyn died, she had tried to visit the hospital. Richard barred her entry. She tried to contact Evelyn's lawyer. He never responded. "You're different," Maria said quietly, as if measuring Evelyn's reaction. "You don't flinch around Richard. Most of the new girls do. I've worked for men like him before," Evelyn replied. "You stop flinching after enough bruises." Maria glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "You ever wonder what happened to the others?" Evelyn's heart ticked faster. "What do you mean?" "The old staff. Fired. One by one. Some left crying. Others left silent." Her voice lowered. "And Claire? She used to smile. Laugh even. Now? They keep her medicated. Call it anxiety management, but it's more like a cage." Evelyn clenched the napkin in her hands. "Why hasn't anyone said anything?" Maria smiled bitterly. "To who? Richard owns the silence around here." Later that week, Evelyn saw Claire sitting on the back steps, her sketchbook open across her knees. Her hands trembled as she drew. Long, scratchy lines, dark ink, abstract faces with hollow eyes, a haunting style for someone so young. "Those are beautiful," Evelyn said gently, standing a few feet away. Claire didn't look up. "No, they're not." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice soft. "You put something of yourself into them. That's what matters." Claire glanced at her, the faintest flicker of warmth in her otherwise dull eyes. "You remind me of someone," she said. "My grandmother. I barely remember her. But you talk like she did. You don't pretend." Evelyn felt her breath catch. "Maybe I'm just old enough to stop pretending." Claire closed the sketchbook without another word and went inside. That night, Evelyn waited until the clock struck 2. The house was asleep. The cameras at the end of the West Hall looped on a 30-second delay. She had timed them for days. She slipped from her quarters, moving with the practiced silence of a woman who had once navigated boardrooms full of predators in suits. Her heart pounded as she reached Richard's private office door, still locked, still coded, but not impenetrable. Maria, God bless her, had once seen the numbers Richard used. 0927, his birthday. Evelyn keyed them in with a trembling hand, half expecting an alarm. Silence. The door clicked open. She stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and ink. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. 3 monitors glowed on the desk, screensaver flickering like a heartbeat. On the left shelf, a safe. On the desk, a half-finished scotch, still sweating. She began to search. Folders, USB drives, printed spreadsheets, envelopes marked with offshore bank logos. But it was the red folder in the bottom drawer that nearly brought her to her knees. Inside were falsified death certificates, not just hers, but backups with different signatures. Forged documents transferring her company shares to Richard. Deeds, power of attorney papers, all signed in her name, dated weeks before her supposed death. One had her actual signature. The rest were counterfeits. There were emails printed on letterhead between Richard and a shadowy legal firm overseas. Discussions of clean asset transfers, executive rights, and liquidation under cover of succession. It was all there. Proof that he hadn't just declared her dead. He had erased her. Evelyn staggered back to her room before dawn, the red folder hidden beneath her cleaning apron. She locked the door behind her, sat on the edge of her cot, and wept, quietly, fiercely, as if the grief had waited 15 years to escape. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, for the girl upstairs drawing sorrow with every pencil stroke, for every employee who had lost their job, for the empire she built, now tainted by greed. She stared at the documents, hands trembling. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was war. The next day, Evelyn moved more carefully. Richard was on edge. She noticed it in the clipped tone he used with the house manager, in the sudden, unannounced meetings, in the tight-lipped exchanges between his assistant and his lawyer over breakfast. Then came the announcement. "I'll need all staff presentable this weekend," Richard declared from the marble staircase, as if he were addressing peasants. "There's a formal event Saturday evening, a corporate gala, major partners attending. Everything must be flawless." He paused. "And Claire will attend. No objections." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward Claire, standing at the bottom of the stairs like a porcelain doll. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just nodded. That night, Evelyn sat with Maria in the staff kitchen, a cup of weak tea between them. "Richard's planning something," Evelyn said. "He's always planning something," Maria muttered. "But this feels bigger." "It is," Evelyn replied. Her tone sharpened. "He's going to sell off part of the company. Something major. I can feel it." Maria looked at her strangely. "You talk like you know the company, like you built it. Evelyn smiled, hiding the weight in her chest. Let's just say I'm invested in seeing it survive. As the mansion prepared for the weekend gala, Evelyn watched, listened, and waited. Richard was about to put on a show, and she planned to steal the spotlight. The mansion glittered like a jewel that night, every window aglow, every hallway humming with voices and champagne laughter. The Brooks estate had never looked more alive, and never felt more hollow. Evelyn watched from behind a curtain on the second-floor landing. Below her, the foyer teemed with elegantly dressed guests, investors, board members, and reporters, all ushered in under golden chandeliers and false pretenses. Waiters floated through the crowd with silver trays, a string quartet played near the stairs, and Richard Allen, in a tailored black tuxedo, moved through it all like a prince at court. He smiled, shook hands, kissed cheeks, made empty promises. She had never seen a man so practiced in deception, and never had she hated him more. Evelyn wore her maid's uniform as armor, moving undetected among the staff, refilling glasses and tidying napkins while watching the night unfold. Her heart beat steadily beneath the disguise, not from fear, but from anticipation. Everything she needed was now in motion. In her apron pocket was a black envelope. No name on the front, but inside, copies of the forged death certificates, bank transfers, legal correspondences, and enough financial data to cripple Richard's public image. The original folder was hidden in a locker off the estate, waiting for a lawyer who would soon receive instructions. But tonight, one person had to see it first: William Hart. She spotted him by the garden doors, standing stiffly among a group of executives. He was older now, with salt at his temples, but still sharp, still serious. William had been Evelyn's CFO for over a decade, loyal, precise, and ethical to a fault. Richard had kept him at arm's length since taking control, and now she knew why. Evelyn moved toward him with the grace of someone invisible. As she passed behind him, she slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't even notice. But when he reached into his coat a few moments later, his brows drew together. She didn't stay to see his reaction. She had more urgent matters to attend to. Claire entered the ballroom 40 minutes after the gala had begun. Dressed in a shimmering midnight blue gown, her hair pinned perfectly, she looked like a porcelain figure. Elegant, untouchable, unreal. But Evelyn saw it immediately. The glassiness in her eyes, the stiffness in her limbs. She was drugged, not unconscious or stumbling, but carefully muted, controlled, just enough to keep her docile under the flashing lights and camera lenses. Richard's voice boomed as he introduced her to a table of investors. "My beautiful niece, Claire," he said, holding her shoulders. "Strong as her grandmother once was. She's the future of this company." Evelyn clenched her fists. She could barely recognize the young woman standing there. But then Claire turned slightly, and in that single look, Evelyn saw the silent scream behind her granddaughter's eyes. An hour later, Evelyn found Claire in the side corridor near the stairs, trembling. Her hands clutched the railing. Her breath was shallow. "I can't," Claire gasped. "It's too loud. I feel wrong." Evelyn moved quickly but gently. "Come with me." Claire didn't resist. She let Evelyn guide her up the stairwell, through the service hallway, and onto the rooftop terrace, a place long forgotten by guests and hosts alike. Cold wind rushed over them. The music below was distant now. Claire stepped to the edge, gripping the stone barrier. "I don't feel real anymore," she whispered. Evelyn's throat tightened. "You are. You're more real than anyone down there." Claire shook her head. "They don't care what I think. They dress me up, tell me to smile, tell me I'm lucky." Her voice broke. "They keep saying my grandmother was a legend, that she'd be proud of me." "She would be," Evelyn said, tears forming. "More than you know." Claire turned slowly. "You sound like her." Evelyn hesitated. The truth burned on her tongue, but not yet. "She loved you, Claire," Evelyn said carefully. "She would never let anyone treat you like this. She left me." "No," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "She was taken from you, and she's trying to come back." Claire stared at her, breathing ragged. Then she collapsed into Evelyn's arms, and Evelyn held her, as if making up for 15 years of silence. The next morning was gray and silent. The guests were gone. The staff cleaned in a daze. The house felt tense, like the calm before a storm. Richard called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. in the executive dining room. No staff were allowed inside. At 8:59, Evelyn stood at the far end of the hallway, no longer dressed as a maid. She wore a tailored navy suit, simple pearl earrings, and a silk blouse that once belonged to her when she was Evelyn Brooks, CEO of Brooks Textiles. Her hair was swept back, her shoulders squared. She pushed open the boardroom doors. The room fell into stunned silence. 12 board members, 2 lawyers, William and Richard, frozen at the head of the table, his jaw slack. "What is this?" he barked. "Who let her in?" "I did," William said, rising, "because I read what she gave me." Richard turned on him. "You can't be serious. That woman is a lunatic." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice calm. "I am Evelyn Brooks, founder and majority stakeholder of this company, and I am not dead." Murmurs exploded around the table. Several executives leaned forward, blinking. A few looked pale. Richard laughed, forced and sharp. "This is a stunt, a con. You expect us to believe—" Evelyn cut him off. "You falsified my death certificate, forged my signature, transferred my shares without consent, diverted company funds into shell accounts in the Caymans, the Netherlands, and Singapore. I have copies of it all, and the originals are with my attorney." She turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man sitting at the head of this table is not just a fraud. He's a thief, a criminal, and he nearly destroyed the legacy this company was built on." The silence was thunderous. Claire stepped into the room. No makeup, no gown, just a simple sweater and jeans. Her eyes were clear. "I believe her," she said, and for the first time in years, her voice carried weight. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Evelyn stood tall at the end of the long, polished table, the storm of her return now undeniable. Her voice had been calm, her words deliberate, and now there was nothing left but truth. Richard Allen leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a cold smile on his face. "You expect us to believe this performance?" he said with a scoff. "Anyone can put on a suit and recite a few dates. That doesn't make you Evelyn Brooks." Evelyn didn't flinch. She opened her briefcase and produced 2 sealed envelopes and a small hard drive. "These are certified documents, notarized and verified by my legal team, medical records, signed affidavits from the physician who treated me during my illness, and witness statements from employees who were dismissed after questioning my death. This," she held up the drive, "contains financial records and communications between Richard and at least 3 offshore consultants involved in laundering millions from this company." She handed them to William, who stepped forward without hesitation. The man had barely slept since receiving the anonymous folder, and now he confirmed its contents with swift, practiced hands. He turned to the room. "These are legitimate. Her medical records match Evelyn's archived personnel file. Her fingerprints were confirmed this morning by private investigators. And I've personally reviewed the financial trail. It's all there." The color drained from Richard's face. "Don't be ridiculous," he barked. "You don't have the authority." "You don't," William interrupted, a rare steel in his tone. "Not anymore." Claire stepped forward from the doorway. All eyes turned to her. She wasn't a broken girl tonight. No longer the silent, distant figure paraded around like a symbol. She walked into the room with her head high and her voice strong. "I knew something was wrong," she said, eyes locked on Richard. "For years I felt it. But I didn't have proof. I didn't have anyone to believe me. She looked at Evelyn, then stepped beside her and took her hand. "I do now." Evelyn squeezed her granddaughter's fingers, pride swelling in her chest. At that moment, the door opened. Two plainclothes officers entered, led by William's assistant. One officer stepped toward Richard. "Richard Allen, you are under investigation for identity fraud, financial misconduct, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. You need to come with us." Richard's mouth fell open. "You can't do this. You can't just... This is my company." Evelyn stepped closer. "It was never yours. It was built on integrity, on people, not greed." As the officers cuffed him, Richard locked eyes with her, fury replacing fear. "You think this ends with me?" "No," she said, stepping back. "It ends with me, the right way." The boardroom emptied in stunned silence, murmurs trailing down the hallway. Evelyn sat down in the chair at the head of the table, not in triumph, but in closure. William approached. "Everything you said. You really were watching all this time." "Long enough," she replied, "but I won't stay." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "I came to fix what was broken, not to reclaim what I lost." 2 weeks later, the Brooks estate was transformed. The mansion no longer echoed with fear, but with quiet restoration. The oppressive portraits were gone. The staff returned to full pay. Departments were reopened. Workers who had been silenced were rehired and welcomed like family. And at the head of the company, William Hart took his place as the new president, steady, ethical, and loyal to the vision Evelyn once began. As for Evelyn, she submitted a formal resignation. Her statement read simply, "This company was never about one name. It was always about the people who gave it meaning." She sold her remaining shares and donated a majority of her wealth to causes that had once mattered to her: education for women, shelters for displaced workers, grants for young creators in fashion and design. She didn't want a monument. She wanted a legacy. The garden bloomed again by spring. Evelyn walked slowly down the stone path, her hand lightly brushing the petals of newly planted hydrangeas. Beside her, Claire walked barefoot in the grass, her sketchbook in hand, filled with life instead of shadows. "I sent in my portfolio," Claire said quietly, "to the Art Institute in Chicago." Evelyn smiled. "And?" "They accepted me." A pause. "Full scholarship." Evelyn stopped walking. Her heart swelled in a way it hadn't in years. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, barely holding back tears. Claire laughed. "You are my grandmother." There it was. Not a question. A truth. They sat on the bench under the willow tree Evelyn had planted decades ago. The sun filtered through the branches. The past no longer haunted the space. "I always thought I'd leave this company to someone," Evelyn said, voice soft. "But the company was never the real legacy." Claire looked at her, eyes shining. "You are," Evelyn whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt whole.